This episode was recorded in two segments. The first with Alex Kusturok in Winnipeg, shortly after the world premiere of the Métis opera Keur, The Heart of the North. Check out Alex's new album, Wedged in Tradition. The second segment was recorded shortly after in Edmonton with Brianna Lizotte.
We have the right to self-government, to self-determination of land. And the people that are here are going to go back and continue the struggle. This is not an end, it's only a beginning.
Thank you for joining our podcast, The True Canadians, based on our book by the same title. We're here today with Alex Kusturok, a very well-known Métis fiddler who's been all over the world. And today we're in Winnipeg, where Alex just wrapped up a very groundbreaking opera on Riel. Maybe we should start with that. How did that come about, and how did it go?
It was great. It was Keur, Riel's Heart of the North. The librettist was Suzanne Steele out of Vancouver, and I was a co-composer alongside Neil Weisensell, who you know.
As who I know, coincidentally.
Your high school days, such a small world. It was a beautiful project. It was the first Métis-led opera on the main stage. And it was, there was a cast of over 100. And to have co-composed that, I wrote the fiddle tunes in it. So I was down for 2 weeks of rehearsal and then 3 performances at the Centennial Concert Hall here in Winnipeg. All 3 performances were sold out, 2,500 people plus. And just what an exciting experience. People from all over came down. It was presented by the Manitoba Opera. So you had leaders from Métis communities across the country, which was really great. Premier, the new premier, Wab Canoe, was there. And just the message of it, with the fiddle tunes, and there was traditional jigging as well as opera. So what they kind of billed it as was Festival des Voyageurs out of here with a side of opera.
That's really funny how they take kind of that local focus. Yeah, the Festival des Voyageurs. I grew up with that, as would Neil would have as well. I'm just going to ask you how it was working with him. But while you think about that answer, I'll just say that selfishly, Neil and I, we played soccer actually since we were 6. And what's interesting to me about Neil's involvement in this and my involvement working with the Métis is that we would have had similar experiences both growing up in an area called Fort Garry together, where we spent 5 minutes in grade 11 talking about the Métis. And yet here he is, clearly very much immersed and passionate about this topic, as am I. So how was that? How was that working with Neil?
Working with Neil was great. This being my first opera, I would write the fiddle tunes and then my mom would score out the music because, interestingly enough, I can't read music. So I would write the tunes and then send it to my mom, who would send it to Neil, and he would orchestrate the whole thing. So he was conducting this symphony orchestra, and I was also conducting the symphony orchestra with my feet. They were following me. So my footboard, if you've seen me play, I plug in and I try to emulate that heartbeat. So that was blasting through the monitors there. So Neil was conducting the orchestra. I was conducting Neil. So it was really great. It was really fun.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. Yeah, I saw a clip of you rehearsing. I think it was like in a gymnasium.
Yeah, we had 2 weeks of rehearsals in a church basement. Oh, it was kind of a gym setting.
You rehearsed in a church basement, and here we are, both of us, the first time ever in a chapel at the Winnipeg airport, because it was the only place we could find some quiet. How about that?
Frequent churchgoers we are.
Yes, and Louis Riel was quite religious, as I recall from my studies and readings. You mentioned your mom. I'm not sure if this is right, but I'd like to ask you about how you got into this art and became so refined and well-known for it. I think your mom had something to do with that, but maybe you could share with us. How did you go from being Alex to being Alex Kusturok, who so very many people, you'll be bashful about it, but many people know about you and your career?
Well, my mom was a 3-time Canadian Grandmaster fiddle champion. I grew up going to the old-time dances. She is an old-time fiddle player, so I was immersed in that growing up around Manitoba. And she'd bring me, across the country. She would compete or, go for a show or what have you. So she always kind of made sure the music was in my life. But the cool thing is that she let me listen to whoever I wanted and create my own style, which is completely different than my mom's. And, my career looks a lot different than hers did. And that's what she wanted. She wanted me to not ride her coattails, not, piggyback what she was doing in the contest scene, in the old time scene, but to make my way. And, I'm a Métis fiddle player. I mean, so is she, but she's more of the old time style. So my career kind of took a different turn.
That's fascinating. And you make me want to know, particularly for our listeners who are not of Métis descent, what is, old time and new time Métis fiddling? Not to put you too much on the spot, it requires you to sort of dig into the archives of what you know of the history. But like the Red River cart and jigging that you mentioned earlier, fiddling is such an ingrained, deep-set cultural, traditional activity for the Métis. And what is old-time Métis fiddling? What's new-time fiddling?
Well, when new time, that's the first time I've ever heard that word. I don't think there's anything called new time.
Okay.
But when you think of old-time fiddle, you think of the Don Messer. And he used to have a program on the CBC, would air right after Hockey Night in Canada. So that kind of Ontario, Don Messer, Graham Townsend style of fiddle playing, very smooth, very Canadian-based, waltzes, foxtrots, polkas, jigs, and reels. But there's also the Cape Breton style, which is huge influenced by the Scottish, and then the Quebecois with the footwork. So the Métis is hugely based on the Scottish and the Quebecois. So they both have that heavy drive, that heavy downbeat to it, and where the old time is a lot kind of smoother. So you take a bit of the Quebecois, you take a bit of the Scottish, you take a bit of the Irish, and you kind of take the rhythmic aspect of the three of those things and put it together with a few of the tunes, and that's the Métis style. So the Red River Jig is a tune that's taken or adapted from the Quebecois style, le grand jig simple, they call it, so the grand simple jig. And so what would have happened was these old-timers from, the Red River settlements, the different Métis settlements, Alberta, would have listened to these old records or these players and adapted what they have heard from that, and then that would have been the Red River Jig.
And this would have been as far back as the 1800s.
Yes. So that what the Métis is a cross between the Quebecois, the Scottish, and the Irish, but it's these old-timers like me who couldn't read music, who learned them by ear, and of course you learn something by ear is not exactly 100% right, but we did have the powwow drum beat in our roots as well. So you take that heavy downbeat of those musical styles as well as the First Nations downbeat, you get a highly energetic style of fiddle playing.
Isn't that something that, because when you hear it, when you go up to Métis Crossing, I was just there, I think yesterday, north of Edmonton, and when you hear that, it's so identifiable, you think of it right away. I'm holding up our book where we have our vignette. Fiddling for the Pope. There's a picture here of yourself, Brianna Lizotte, playing for Pope Francis, who's originally from South America, a rather non-typical as far as popes go. And as we know, he came to Canada last summer and came to Lac St. Anne, and that was a very historic moment. There was an apology that many had waited for that was part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations and calls to action, but I think meant a lot to many people in Métis, but also First Nations and Inuit. But this was before that. You went to Rome, and you and Brianna played, and you were within 10 feet of the Pope. It's amazing. It's not something that happens very often, if ever. It's a once in a lifetime, I would say. How did this come about that you were, and I think it was even delayed because of COVID, if I'm not mistaken. How did this come about in it? How is it that you and Brianna were able to make this happen? I mean, it's just such a rare event that you would hear about that a Pope would agree to participate in.
So I'd heard about what was going on, and my son was born on February 21st, And I had said to my wife, I'm going to spend probably 3 months home. I'm not going to tour. I'm not going to play. I'll play around home because I have to eat but I'm not going to travel. So we brought him home from the hospital. I think he was 4 days old, and I had a gig in Bonnyville, and that was kind of my last one. It was just a little afternoon gig. So I went there, and President Batoche was there and told me that Angie Keur wanted to bring a fiddle out there because the Métis, the Inuit, and the First Nations were going, and they were each bringing a part of their culture to share with Pope Francis. And of course, the Métis should be a fiddle. So they told me about this, and I said, I'm in. So then I go outside and I call my wife and I say, so I just got offered this gig. I didn't give an answer yet. I said, I talked to you first, which was BS. I'd already accepted it. I mean, I can't. And I said,
I was going to say, that's the ultimate pass.
Yes.
Like anytime guys want to go to a sporting event or they go to the bar, you go say to their wife, well, you're supposed to be doing chores that evening. But when you say to your wife, hey, I got an opportunity to go to the Vatican. And that's...
and to play and participate in this historic event, and to hear from Angie that it was so important to her that we bring a fiddle and to be a part of that, and they said, well, it's going to be you and Brianna, and I said, great, this will be fun. So now selfishly, like to go there and to witness these elders and to see the piece when they heard the apology, and they needed that as a part of their healing, to see them take that in was such a beautiful thing. But now selfishly, my son was 5 days old when I got offered that. My son was less than a month old when I went there. I'm going, when my son learns about this in school, in history class, he's going to go, that's my dad was there. You see that picture of the two fiddlers in front of the Pope? That's my dad. There's actually a photo of him and I at Métis Crossing. We're holding up that book that you're referring to, and he's holding up the page with me on it, and that's cool. And you even signed the book, and you didn't sign it to me, the one copy that I got. I told you to sign it to my son. So when he's older and he sees that book, here's your signature, and it says to Evie. So that's a huge part of that for me, is to just, it's kind of a legacy that my mom's kind of is leaving for me. And, this is such a part of a legacy that I'm leaving for my son.
Legacy and the future are two things you learn about when you get exposed to the Métis that you don't see commonly out in our so-called colonial society as much. I would say not nearly as much. Maybe it's because a lot of us are third generation or fourth generation and we don't really have a sense of where we came from. But the Métis have a very deeply ingrained sense of where they came from. They are of Canada, ethnogenesis here in Canada. And they also have a very strong sense of where they're going, and you just, what you've just said is a real example of that. So you're over there. I'm not going to let you off the hook quite yet, because that was such a monumental event. You get over there and, I'll just throw an open-ended question at you. And then what?
Well, we jumped off the plane. It was a long plane ride. It was funny. Like, I think if you talk to Cassidy and you talk to
Cassidy Caron, the president of the Métis National Council.
Yeah. If you talk to her team and you talk to the people that were lining this up, I think they had a different experience than me. I think the planning of it was kind of tough on that end, but I just showed up. I just showed up for everything that they had planned. Like, we had a supper at the embassy. We had various suppers at the hotel with different people and the bishops from out there. To go to the Vatican and to see the part of the Vatican that nobody sees was great. Like, you see the guards there, there was so much. Well, I think we were there a week.
You actually went to, like, the Pope's, like, private reception chamber, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And that's the photo.
That's where that photo was taken. And just to look at the marbles and Michelangelo's art, it's everything there is kind of larger than life. And that's what I can say about it. It was just, that's it. It was just larger than life. And, I think to be there and to support the elders, and the really cool thing was to see when he apologized, but to see these elders with my own two eyes, elders that have healed, some of our people suffer from addiction, and to see these elders that have healed from that were able to receive this apology in such a way that they could take it in and to see how it affected them, it was really beautiful. It was really beautiful to see that. It was really beautiful to see Angie's interactions with Pope Francis and, you know, the happiness there. And she was joking around with him, and, you know, he was receiving that, and he was joking around with her. Like, it was so cool to just see that for what it was, and to be there and to see that with my own two eyes, that yes, this visit did mean something.
It's very modest of you to, when I ask how the experience was for you to reply that what was so significant about it was what you saw the experience was for elders, for Métis elders, like Angie, who's a very well-known Métis elder, and went over there at an advanced age. I think she and Pope Francis were 85 years old last year, I believe.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah, and that's it. You know, we play music to be of service, or I play music to be of service. You know, yes, I make a living, but whether I'm at a dance hall lifting people up musically, at the Centennial Concert Hall where I was at, you know, when the fiddle and feet come in and moves you to a different place, it lifts you up, it makes you happy, it makes you forget about your problems, it makes you forget about what's going on in your life. That's a service to people. That's something that I'm providing to people. And being at the Vatican and playing was no different. It doesn't matter if I'm, you know, on a trip and I end up in a random kitchen and an elder asks me to play a tune. Of course, right? You ask me to play, I'll play. And the Vatican's no different.
I would think this particular Pope Francis, everything I've heard about him, and I've seen him live. I saw him at Lac Saint Anne.
I've seen him live.
Live.
You're talking about him like it was a concert. I've seen Pope Francis
celebrity.
Live.
Yeah, I've seen him do his piece on stage. Yes. Yeah. Well, what you hear about him, and it was similar with Jean Paul many years ago, is they have this sense of being humble and actually taking to heart what the intent is of their role. And so I think you would appreciate that perspective that you've given. And I think you played also outside, did you not? In addition to in the Vatican?
Yes. So there was 2 meetings. There was that picture in the book that was at the last meeting that was the second one. But the first one was when the elders had their one-on-one meetings with him, and they were coming out of the Vatican. So the Métis, all of them were behind me and Brianna, and we're playing the Red River Jig, you know, walking into the middle of St. Peter's Square. And that was cool because the acoustics of that, it was like you were in a big hall. It was like you could hear yourself clear as day. And you see all the press there and the cameras and that. And to just be leading that is the ultimate act of service. Like they just relived a lot of trauma. They just let this man know what they had been through. And the thing that happened after that was I was leading and carrying them back into the public from that with music. Mm-hmm. What a gift that is.
I'd like to hear how you characterize it relative to the term reconciliation, because that's the phrase that's become very popular and that's used a lot, that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, commissioned by Murray Sinclair, who's from here, from Winnipeg. That's what those calls to action are largely about. And it reminds me of Louis Riel saying, you know, in 100 years, we will rise again and it'll be the artists who will lead us. Was that a quintessential moment of reconciliation or a step toward reconciliation, and what came next with the Pope coming here a year later?
Yes. Like I said, you know, how I live my life and how I approach music and how I approach, you know, being a father, how I approach being a husband. And I used to, you know, suffer from addiction, and that is a very selfish disease. You know, all I did was take and take and take. And if you couldn't offer me something, you wouldn't be a part of my life, right? So when I got clean, when I got well, it wasn't, you know, putting down the substance. It was, okay, I need to live completely differently. And that's, you know, giving to, and, you know, what can I bring to? Yes, there was a lot of press about, you know, this not being genuine or what it was. But I was talking to an elder, and what he had said to me, he says, Alex, think of the amount of people in Canada, or maybe I was just a side person at the conversation. I was just listening. He was talking to somebody who says, well, he came to Canada, big deal. Like it's whatever. People will never be happy. But if what this elder says was, look at the amount of Roman Catholics in Canada compared to other parts of the world. There's not that many compared to different parts of the world. If all of Canada stopped practicing Catholicism, in no way financially would it affect the Roman Catholic Church as a whole. But Pope Francis came here to meet with everybody. He took time, and he's old. He came here, right? So you need to think of it like that. You know, it's, I believe, and that's what he says, and that's what the elder says. Those aren't my words. And if you look at it like that, I think there's a little bit of truth there that, you know, there is beauty in him coming here, you know, as a recovered alcoholic, and you know, that's, you know, we talk about intergenerational trauma. We talk about that, and you know, I've experienced that, you know, on my wife's side of the family as well. There does need to be a lot of individual. My rock bottom was when I realized I'm the problem. Right. It wasn't the intergenerational trauma. It wasn't what I grew up with. It wasn't this. It was, I'm one of the 10% of the people that are alcoholic and, you know, suffer from addiction. So I need to recover from that mentally and physically. And then I can go to therapy and counseling and deal with all that. And that goes back to looking at these elders who did recover from alcoholism and addiction, and they were able to receive that. Mm-hmm. Apology, and you look at them as two separate things. If you look at addiction as a result of something, you won't heal. It's impossible, because you're never going to find what it is the result of. That's my experience. Until I realize that I'm the result of it. I'm the problem. I can't drink like anybody. I can't do this. Let me change. Then I can work on that. So it was to be able to go to the Vatican. If I was in the problem, I would be looking around going, oh, the Catholic Church is off. It's so bad. I hate this here. I want to burn this place to the ground. But going in there at the point in sobriety that I was able to take in what those elders were going through. I was able to look around and appreciate Michelangelo's art. Am I a practicing Roman Catholic now? No, I'm not. But I could appreciate it for what it is. I could appreciate it for what the purpose of being there was. And I think that if more people got to that place and kind of separated physical addiction and trauma, if they had separated those two things, we're going to have a lot more healed people out there.
I think what's really interesting amongst many things that you touched on is that Canadians often, when we read in the paper about, you know, reconciliation, and we're able to remove ourselves emotionally or personally from it because we come up with terms that allow us to do that. Oh, this is the term the government has. This is how we're going to deal with the Métis, the First Nations. We'll just call it reconciliation. But the way you've described this, I mean, it can be a very personal thing, the intergenerational trauma, which reconciliation ideally would help to start to alleviate for your son's generation, ideally, is a term. The reality of it means so much more. It's so much more personal than we realize, or maybe want to realize, because in the colonial experience, once you go down that road, there's going to be a lot of guilt there, and that's starting to occur, but ultimately, ideally, it'll be for the better. But before we end, I'd like to situate you, and then you could help situate us as an audience.
So there is the pit. Neil is conducting the pit in front of us.
Okay.
I am on a riser on the middle of the stage.
Oh, wow.
Overlooking.
Oh, fantastic.
Front row seat.
Is that right? Like fiddler on
everybody sees. No. It's not like a high roof.
No, I know, but I just remember going to Rainbow Stage, which is a very well-known amphitheater here just up Main Street, just north of where you were. And I saw a fiddler on the roof there. That's kind of where the fiddler was, like in the center at the top.
We were front and center. We were front and center because that was kind of that was Suzanne's goal, was Métis people take center stage.
Okay. So that gets me to my question, and that's so cool. I'm curious, the reaction. You've had so much professional experience. You clearly understand playing to the audience, reacting to the audience, observing the audience. But this amazingly unique event, cultural event, musical event, my gosh, like, what was going through your mind when you first got into it and saw all these people that you've just described? I mean, I guess maybe it's dark, the lights on the stage, but you probably would have heard the reaction. You might have seen some of it. What was that like?
There were 3 parts to it. The first part was, will people show up? So a little bit of nerves, will people show up? Because, with Métis people, sometimes they show up on Métis time and they say they're going to be somewhere, and we go, oh, well, did we get called to do something else the last minute? So will people show up? So before the show started, I took a walk out, sold out crowd, crossed that off. Next one was, will I hit my first cue? Because when I start a tune, it would be after, when Louis says something. Now, the third part is, will people like it? So then we started reading reviews, and they've all looked good. 5 out of 5 stars, 4.5 out of 5 stars. The message that Suzanne portrayed in that was so beautiful, and just, accommodate her vision with music. I was more worried for her. I'm going, I hope this piece, I hope they appreciate the message. It starts off by saying, some of what you hear is true. Some might be true. Some isn't true. But it's for you to decide. These stories are for you. It was really powerful. And a lot of the same people that came to opening night who weren't planning on coming to the rest, they bought tickets for each the other night. They saw it again and then again. So it was a success. It was a success, and I think it's going to tour.
I was wondering.
I think so. I mean, lots of business has to be done, right, in order to get that to happen. The opera world is totally new to me, but I'm jumping into it. And between Neil and myself and Suzanne, hopefully we can do this project.
Fantastic. We've been speaking with Alex Kusturok here in the chapel, the Winnipeg Airport, the only place where we can get quiet without all the announcements and everybody walking around. On the other half of this podcast, we'll be speaking with Brianna, who we mentioned just a little while ago. So please stay with us, and we'll look forward to that. Alex, thank you so much for your time.
Have a good one.
Hello, this is Audrey Petra. Culture is such an important part of who we are as Métis people. And in our homes many years ago, there was always at least one fiddler. There was people who played music. It seemed to me like constantly. And it was a good time. And then as we moved along, for some of those years, it seemed like we were losing it. We weren't seeing the fiddlers. We weren't seeing the traditions that we saw in the past. But today I am so happy to know that we have so many amazing artists, whether that be musical or otherwise. But when I think about musicians, I think about just a couple months ago, I had the opportunity to go to the Heart of Riel that was premiered in Winnipeg, and having one of our very own Métis fiddlers who's been in our province for a while now, grew up in Manitoba, but has been living in our province in Alberta, and being showcased in that opera. It was just amazing to hear our stories told through music. And what a great job they did. And I think about our other amazing young fiddler, Brianna Lizotte, who grew up listening to her grandpa play, knowing very well all along that's what she wanted to do. And today, she is a great fiddler. She performs all over, just as Alex does. And that is what we need to see, is our culture continue, our music continue. And I'm sure they will make sure it does. We also have a lot of our schools now that are having classes with a lot of young fiddlers. And that really makes me proud, that even though at one point in time, we believed we were losing a lot of our traditions, a lot of our culture. And today, our young people are making it happen again. And I know we'll continue to see that going forward.
We are back, and by the wonders of technology and travel, we're doing the second half of this podcast in Edmonton. Thank you for coming back with us. I'm here with Brianna Lizotte. And Brianna, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
a pleasure. The front end of this interview, we did a recording with Alex in Winnipeg, and we wanted to also get your thoughts on your experiences as a very well-known and accomplished Métis musician, and maybe begin by sort of asking the question people are always very curious about when it comes to individuals who are very accomplished and aspiring as you are, is how did it begin? Where was the interest sparked, and why the fiddle?
Yeah, I grew up in a very musical household. I had great uncles, cousins, great grandfather that used to play. So not only did I hear it in person at kitchen parties and visiting with my family, but my grandpa would take home video and photos, and I grew up watching those. So there's probably at least like 1,000 videos at least of like the kitchen parties that they used to have back in the 80s and 90s. Sometimes even the 70s and 60s. My grandpa has always had video cameras since my dad was alive. So I got to see the progression of not only my dad's life, but also how music impacted them as a family. And it was lots of fiddle players, lots of guitarists, singers. My dad and grandma both play guitar and sing. And her dad played the fiddle. So there's lots and lots of connections to music and kitchen parties and Métis fiddling and all that stuff in our family. So growing up, I definitely fell in love with that music, and it's really all I could think about. But when I was 8 years old, the last fiddle player in my family had passed away. So it was pretty devastating for our family because of how long we had that Métis fiddle music integrated into our family, and then all of a sudden it was gone out of nowhere. It was a big, I want to say like culture shock of like the thing that kept us grounded is gone. And a lot of my family members lived in northern Alberta, and my grandparents and my mom and dad and sister and I lived in Red Deer, central Alberta. So that drive is like about 10, maybe 12 hours long, depending on the months, right? Seasonal months. So it was, for the first like year, I would say, with no music, the family was starting to really feel it and was impacted, like not really seeing much of each other, and that connection was being lost. So one night I had a dream where I was playing the fiddle, and I'd never touched a fiddle before, maybe a couple times tinkering around on it, but I was playing the fiddle and it brought my family back together. And it wasn't even like an audience of like random people like playing a big show, big stage. It was me in the kitchen in my grandparents' house playing for my family, and it was like what it was like in those home videos. So I woke up the next day and I was like, Mom, I need to get a fiddle. And she's like, where did that even come from? And I was like, I don't know. I just have a feeling that today's the day I need to start playing. And since then, it hasn't really stopped. So,
How old were you?
I was about 10 when I started and had that dream.
That's remarkable.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, what a story.
Yeah, thanks.
What a beginning. I'm going to ask you about how you cultivated it from there and got to where you are. But for those listeners that we have who are, not of Métis descent, you can tell us, maybe, since you seem to have a lot of experience with it, what's a kitchen party?
So kitchen parties are exactly the same as you find on the East Coast, Nova Scotian, and, Quebecois, all that stuff over there, kitchen parties. But it's also here in Alberta and all in the prairies, the homeland of the Métis. It's basically a time for family members to get together, to eat food, to share stories, to just reconnect. Usually this was found maybe during the holidays, like especially that week during Christmas and New Year's, because that was the time for, refreshments and, getting ready for the new year to do another year's of hard work. So family members would bring their fiddles, their guitars, all of that stuff, and they'd come together and they'd just jam. They'd have a good time. Pretty much everyone back in the day used to play music because there was really nothing else to do. There was no, TVs, or very rarely everyone had a TV in their home. So the only way to entertain themselves was either go outside and work or play the fiddle, play an instrument. So that's pretty much why kitchen parties were like a huge deal, was because that was our time to reconnect with each other and catch up after, a year's of hard work and, blood, sweat, and tears. And then at the end of it all, it's like, get to see family. And that was the one thing that really connected us as Métis people.
Fantastic. That's amazing. That's one of the things I've noticed since I, was working on the book with Patricia Russell, my co-author, is that with Métis, there's such a strong sense of community that you kind of don't see as much out in the so-called colonial world. There are people who have friends and there's family and there's get connections, but not in the same cultural way I've never seen before. Mm-hmm. Not with all these elements that are so germane, like the fiddle, like the jigging, so many traditional symbols of Métis community and belonging. It almost feels like coming home sometimes, even though it's not my home. I'm not Métis, but you feel at home because you're in a home environment, even if it's a public setting, even if it's like expo or a casino or something, you still feel that commonality in that community. So going from 10 years old, so you realize I'm interested in this, and part of it seemed to be an interest in bringing family together. What'd you do then?
Well, it was also around the time that I started concert band in school. So I think I was about in grade 5 or grade 6 when I picked up the fiddle. And I think that year was the year where it was mandatory for all kids to do band class. So I chose the clarinet, started out there. So music was like a really big deal in middle school for me, because not only was I starting to play the fiddle, which was a personal, musical goal, but now I was playing music with other people outside of my family, which was also really neat. And then that led me to going into a marching band in Red Deer.
Oh, wow.
So I was like a drummer, I was a clarinet player.
Oh, wow.
So I played a lot of instruments, and I also picked up trombone in my last couple years of high school.
Oh, wow.
So it was definitely like my teen years, like my early teen years to late teen years was all like experimenting with concert band music and the horns and the percussive instruments that could make unique sounds that I was like, oh, I've never heard before, because growing up with fiddle music, it's way different than classical or orchestral concert band music. So being surrounded by that as well helped shape me to who I am today. There was a while where I was really struggling. I think it was like 14, 15, all 14, 15-year-olds are very hormonal and emotional. So I was like, I don't think I want to do fiddling anymore. I think I want to do concert band music. And my mom's like, no, that's not happening. And of course, like, it's not always like I wanted to play the fiddle. It was honestly really hard for me to pick it up for a while, just because the only time I got to play the fiddle was at fiddle camps, and that was only in the summertime. Okay. But also at the same time, that was the months of marching band. So it was like the Calgary Stampede, the parade seasons, the show seasons. So it was like the summertime was the music time, and then pretty much it was dull throughout the rest of the year. And I did a couple gigs. The Métis Nation of Alberta, I've done lots of gigs with them over the years. And they're part of the reason why I'm as successful as I am today. Super grateful for everyone in the Métis Nation. And I don't know, it was very hard for me. Everyone goes through their ups and downs of things that they're passionate about. Like, you're like, I don't know if I want to do this, because it's not as fun as I thought it would be the whole year round. But, as I grew up and started to do a bit more gigs and starting to mature into high school and looking into post-secondary schooling, I was thinking, no, I should stick with my fiddling, because it's just done so much for me and my family. I want to continue this. And then when I was 18, I dropped out of the marching band, because it only goes up to 21. But with me going to school, I was like, I need to focus on my music. So it's been, the last couple years. I just graduated from MacEwan University.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Doing a music performance and talking about the concert band. I have a feeling, now that I've, gone through the 4 years and
4 years.
Yeah, 4 years of post-secondary. And I think this is like the most time I've had off in my life is these last like 10 months of not being in school, or these 6 months at least. It's been like time for me to reflect on my life, really, just because I've always been go schooling, like homework, and then gigs, and then traveling to different places to do my gigs. So it's like I've always just been, constantly streamlined focus on music or homework. So now that I've had like downtime, oh my gosh, at first I was really struggling. I was like, what do I do with my life? I'm like out of school. I've got no homework. I got no school. The only thing I have are gigs, and those are in the fall time, very few and far between, because it's just like everyone's cooling off from busy festivals all summer long. So I'm just like, I was sitting at home and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. But it actually had me reflecting on what has happened in these last like 11 years of me playing, 12 years of me playing. And because of my concert band years, in my early teens to being 18, it helped me choose what direction of my fiddle music I want to go. And I'm incorporating horns now into my music.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, like cajon, different percussion stuff. So pretty much everything that I grew up and kind of had that structural foundation on with that concert band and the drum line and the percussion, it's all starting to come out into my fiddling as well. And because I went to McEwen, which is a jazz-based program, I had to work with other horn players because I was the only fiddle player in my year. So it was like, had to work with like a couple saxophone players, trombone, trumpet, and I was like, man, this is so weird. I've never worked with horn players on my fiddle. It's always been me with like a clarinet or something. So coming in with a stringed instrument, it was like, oh my goodness, like is this even going to work? But going in, I kind of felt that my music, Métis music, and jazz somehow made sense, or like country and jazz music kind of fit hand in hand. Like when you listen to bluegrass, it kind of sounds like the fast and hard bebop that you listen in jazz. Like when you think of Charlie Parker and you think of all of the bebop classics, and then you think of someone like Billy Scruggs and all of these bluegrass people like Mark O'Connor, who is a bluegrass fiddle player. They go hand in hand because it's both that fast-paced and soloing structure. So it's just like, wow, like improvising. It's so cool. And then in Métis music, our music is very percussive. It's very, like, it's driving. I bet Alex talked about that lots, of like how it's like that beat and that driving heartbeat of music.
It's very distinctive when you hear it.
100%. And I find that it's very similar to, let's say, something like blues or like swing. They're very similar. They have that same structural foundation. They went in two totally different directions, but they still have that same like gallopy feeling, like the ba-dum, da-dum, da-dum. Like that's both swing and Métis music. It's cool to see, you know, the similarities. And going forward, I'm hoping to incorporate my Métis music and my jazz side now into one, and trying to find the commonalities there. So that's where I've come from, and then where I'm hoping to go with my music.
Right. Well, you know, I'll share with you just briefly my story, which is the opposite extreme. When I was 10 years old, I was dreaming about playing in the NHL as a professional hockey player, and I absolutely could have made it, with the exception of a few setbacks. Those would have included the right training, equipment, time on the ice, talent, and ambition and size. But, you know, if I'd had those, or at least a combination of a few, but I did have to take music as well. And Charlie Parker, what did he play?
He played saxophone.
Saxophone. Okay, so I chose the trumpet because the clarinet and the flute were already taken, and I knew those would be the smallest to take home in my bag. So, but the trumpet was the next size up. And I did 3 years, and I remember the teacher coming in and saying to me, I think, honest to God, probably pretty close into the third year even, saying, are you ever going to get past the scale? And I said, well, no, but I can shoot a hockey puck if you want to go down to the rink.
Yeah.
She said, no, it's not what we're here for.
Yeah.
So listening to you is just so enlightening and eye-opening, because, I mean, your whole life has been, you know, exposed to this, multiple instruments, all kinds of different types of music and so on. So I'm very interested to have people listen a little bit to you talk about what some of the highlights, you know, have been of this experience. And you mentioned playing on TSN, and of course there's a big trip to Rome that we're going to touch on. But would those be two of the big, you know, obviously playing at Métis events would be huge for you, and playing the March and Métis Crossing. We have a photo of that in the book. But tell us about that experience on TSN. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was, I did 1 year of open studies before heading into my degree. So I did 5 years post-secondary.
What?
But, yeah,
Wow.
So it's a long time. So I first started out at, then called Red Deer College, now called Red Deer Polytechnic. But RDC, I was just doing some basic arts classes, doing prerequisites for the classes that I needed to take at MacEwan. And one of my friends that was actually an instructor for the Royals, a marching band I was in for many years, he got a hold of me because he knew I was a fiddle player, but he knew me as a drummer, right? I played the snare drum and the tenor drum and bass drum, all of the things. But he got a hold of me and was like, hey, I have a friend who is at Red Deer College like you. He is in charge of putting together the history of Red Deer for the Canada Winter Games grand opening. Would you be up to play? And this was like in September, October when I just started school, and I was like, sure. That sounds really good. And it was a cool process because it wasn't like we came in with a song, but the idea for the song was there would be 3 drummers that would play the big tom drums and then me. So it was 3 drummers and a fiddle.
Okay.
And it was something that's never really been seen before, where it's just drums and fiddle, especially like Celtic style, maybe with the bodhrán, the traditional Irish drum, but not with like a contemporary drum like a tom, something from a drum set, right? So it was an interesting, planning and developing this idea of there's 3 drummers that are all going to try to play the same thing in line with the melody of the music. And there's a video on YouTube on my dad's...
I was about to ask. I wrote down YouTube.
Yeah. So my dad, he recorded the whole thing on his camera, and it was like a little Sony camera. But I don't think there's any like news broadcast or like the TSN live stream, just because I haven't seen it since then. But my dad, he has the TSN live opening of the ceremonies, and not only was I playing that song with the 3 drummers, but also my sister was in the marching band at the time, and the Red Deer Royals got to play for them too. So both of us had the chance to be part of the grand openings for the Canada Winter Games in 2019. So that was... And I think I played for because the Red Deer Centrium holds like couple thousand people. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of people. And then they're like, no, there's going to be like thousands, tens of thousands more people watching online. And I'm like, oh, and I was like ready to crap my pants. Because I was like, wow, that is a lot of people. And I remember like nearly throwing up before I walked on stage, because I was like, I had a chance before everyone started to fill up the stands to like actually see where we were. Like we were on this like high up pedestal, and there was like a screen behind us showing the history of Red Deer. There was like a narration over top. We had gone through it like hundreds of times just to get the timing right, because it was like we wanted certain moments to impact the video and then the video to impact the music. And it was really cool to experience, that was my first time really syncing up video with my music live and in person. That was really unique and special that I had never done before. And to this day, I don't think I've really done anything to that extent. And it's like, that's still one of the coolest things that I've done, for sure. And I was just like, man, looking out and just like big open space. And like, you can't see anyone, but they're all there. So you're like, oh, that's crazy. And it's a lot of people. So it was a lot of fun. And it was just really cool to be part of. So that was one of the highlights for sure.
And as amazing as that was, of course, you knew this was coming. We have this incredible photo of you not only meeting the Pope, which very few people ever get to say in their lifetime, but playing with Alex for the Pope and being 10 feet away from him. How did that come about, and how did that experience feel for you while it was occurring?
It was an insane month, for sure. I had known that the Métis National Council was planning this for a while.
Right, a delegation to Rome. I should have mentioned that, although we talked about it with Alex in the first half,
So it was interesting because it was, at first, it was supposed to just be the delegates going, and that was going to be it, just meetings with the Pope and whatever else. But because of COVID setbacks, it had pushed it from the summertime to the springtime, like March.
Right.
And I remember I actually had COVID in the end of February. So I was like bedridden, like kind of dying. I was just like pathetic in bed. And I get a call, and I answered, I look at the phone and it says, Audrey Petra. I was like, okay. And so I answered the phone, and we talk every once in a while. We're good friends, me and Audrey. She's been one of my biggest supporters, and I'm her biggest supporter. So I answered the phone, and I'm like, hey, how's it going? Like, my nose is like stuffed. I sound so congested. I don't even sound like me. And she's like, I'm okay. Are you okay? And I was like, I've been better. But she picks up the phone and is asking, what are you doing at the end of March? And I was like, well, it's the ending of my term, so I have some finals coming up and some recitals and whatever else that I have to play for. And she's like, okay, well, is it possible for you to join us to come to Rome? And I was like, oh, sure. I was like, totally not well. Like, my mind was elsewhere. I was just like, Rome, yes. That would be cool. And with the marching band, I had been to Rome before. I've been to Italy a couple times.
Oh, okay.
So it was just like, yes, okay. And I was like, yeah, that'd be nice. But I didn't really understand that meant meeting the Pope. And then when I got better, I had a vague memory of this happening. And I was like, was that like a fever dream? Did I make that up? So I call her back. Like, I see her number, like, in like the call history. And I was like, oh, so I call her back. I was like, did you actually call me for
Was that
this?
a COVID call?
Yeah, like, what was this? And she was like, yeah, like, would you want to come with us? Are you available to come with us for the week to Rome to have a meeting with the Pope and to play your fiddle there? And I was like, yeah, sure. And it was like 3 weeks before we had to leave. I was like having to call my bank, having to call everybody, like getting everything set up. Thank gosh I had my updated passport, because that would have been really bad if I didn't. So we go over there, and it's just, it was an insane week in and of itself. It was very emotional, very heavy. It was just so interesting because all of the elders that were in the Métis delegation had never even left their like home province or like the country before, let alone a continent. So going into this like new environment, a lot of them were having a really hard time with adjusting to the country, because, you know, the accents or the language barrier was like really hard to understand, right? It was just like, it was a difficult time for all of us. And not only was it an emotional week, but it was just like the homesick week for a lot of us as well. It was very hard on all of us, which was very interesting. But Alex and I decided, we're here and we have our fiddles all the time. Let's just play for our elders, because they need music more than ever to ground them, right? So we had set up a little kitchen party in the middle of the dining area that we had, and we would try to play at least an hour of music every night before everyone went to bed.
Really? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so we tried to do that just to, you know, reground everyone for another hard day of meetings or press conferences or touring, because we never really had a chance to relax. There was always something happening. It was like super booked of like, we're doing this tour, then a press conference, then a meeting, then this and this. And for a lot of the elders, with the time change, with the new environment, the culture shock, and constantly moving around, it was exhausting for them. Like, we were really worried for a while, because it was like, man, this is like a little too much. Like, this is a lot. So it was a week of really sticking together and, you know, that having that sense of community away from home. And then when it came to the last day of the week, when we had that, like, every delegation came together and had, you know, that final meeting with the Pope, the public meeting, it was like this buildup of anticipation, of worry, right? Of like, what's actually going to happen here? What are we expecting? What's going to go down basically in this meeting room? And Alex and I, you know, we're kind of sitting there waiting for our turn. We're like, oh my gosh, like, we're here. We're looking at the roof, and there's like paintings, and it's like, oh my goodness, like, this is like, how many people have been in this room? You know what I mean? Like, this is inside like the heart of the Vatican, where no one is allowed to go in. Like, the public eye was never seen in person.
It's like the Pope's private reception chamber, I think.
Yeah.
Is, one maybe, you know, informal term that they use for it.
Yeah, it's like, it was insane. It was just like marble everything, and like super high ceilings, echoey. We're like, oh my goodness, like, this is insane. So we Alex decides, well, we both decided to have a medley of tunes kind of showing the progression of our reconciliation and from, the times of, like, the hard times and the dark days of the Métis into where we are now. A time where we weren't allowed to meet up, a time when we weren't allowed to celebrate our culture, our music, our dance, and our community, like we weren't allowed to see each other, now to where we're able to proudly announce who we are. We're Métis, we're Indigenous people of Canada. We are able to meet together now and actually celebrate who we are as people and not hide. So the first song was a song written by Alex called Memories of Eva. Starts with a really kind of somber note because it was written for his grandmother. Then we go into Big John McNeil kind of picking up steam of like, okay, we're kind of coming back. And then it ends off, of course, with the Red River Jig. So, and we added the foot stomping to it as well. So Alex was doing that dum dum underneath the Big John McNeil and Red River Jig. It was just so special. And what was even cooler was, who knows if Métis music is ever going to touch that floor again. And we were the two fiddlers that got to do it. Like, it was just so, it was a big release of emotion, and especially when the apology happened and hearing it in person was just like goosebumps everywhere, and everyone was just, like, because of all that buildup of emotion, everyone was crying, and like, it was just like really hard to explain what that feeling was like. It was just beautiful, is all I can say.
Well, Brianna, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
I really appreciate you joining us. We've been talking with Alex and Brianna. Thanks for joining us on this episode of our podcast. I appreciate it.
Thanks.